In fact, let's start. There was a recent article on CNN.com, and it said, did Jesus really rise from the dead? It was written by Jay Parini. And here's what he says. I'm sure you're aware of it. You're familiar with it. He says, the resurrection stories grew over time, and the resurrection is about moral and spiritual transformation, not a literal rising from the dead on the part of Jesus. So how would you respond to somebody like that? He's got a lot of influence given his platform.
Oh, absolutely. Well, what I would say is that may be what Dr. Parini thinks was the purpose of the resurrection stories. But if you go back to what the apostles thought, they certainly did not think that the resurrection was about renewed moral or spiritual awakening, that the key to the resurrection was the fact that Jesus of Nazareth, who claimed at least to be the Messiah, had died but had risen bodily from the dead. That was the earth-shattering news that they were proclaiming, that because Jesus had risen bodily from the dead, others could have that same hope if they put their faith in him. And we know this by looking at Paul's letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says in that chapter that if Christ has not risen, then your faith is in vain. There's no point in believing if it didn't really happen. And I think that Dr. Parini's theory that, oh, these stories just grew over time, it's simply not true. When you read the article online, he talks about how the stories differ in the Gospels, and really they only differ in very minor details. The same core elements about the resurrection, the discovery of the empty tomb, and the appearances is the same. But then he writes here, related to 1 Corinthians 15, he says, a summary of the resurrection appearances can be found in Paul's letter, and it was written perhaps 20 years after Jesus died. And Dr. Parini says it gives us a sense of what stories people were telling about him. The problem with this analysis is that Parini hasn't taken into account that in 1 Corinthians 15, in verses 3 through 7, nearly all scholars agree Paul didn't write that part. That was a creed that Paul had been given. He uses language such as, this was received, I received this and handed it on to you. This is an ancient creed saying that Jesus rose and appeared to people that has been dated by scholars to about 5 years after the resurrection, or even sooner. So this isn't some kind of legend that developed decades afterward, that this story grew. It goes back to the very beginning of Christian belief. And the puzzle for scholars is, how do you explain the rapid rise, the quick rise in belief that Jesus is God among these monotheistic Jews, people like Paul and Peter, if Jesus did not rise from the dead? And that's why in my DVD I argue that the resurrection is the most plausible explanation for this and many other facets of the Easter story.